thanks to everybody for coming, and thanks for having us here. This is a really wonderful event, very exciting for us. This debate has been misunderstood completely. It's been seen as a debate about homosexuality, and in particular as a debate about whether to expand or restrict the pool of people eligible to marry. And when you see it that way, it's very hard to see the conservative point of view. If you zoom in on a particular household, as the framers of this debate often do, and say, why grant or withhold benefits to that particular household, the conservative view seems almost baffling. That's not what it's about. It's not about homosexuality. It's not about whether to expand or restrict the pool of people eligible for this one institution. It is about what marriage is and what public vision of marriage the state will enshrine and hold up and, over time, teach citizens to internalize and to act on. That's the title of our book, What is Marriage? And when that is the title of the framing of the debate, conservatives win. And if it's not the framing, we lose. So what vision of marriage, what answer to that question is on offer in the proposal to recognize same-sex unions? It's a vision mainly of marriage as an emotional union. It involves other things, but what sets it apart from other forms of friendship or companionship is a certain kind of emotional intensity or priority or hue. On this vision, marriage is just your number one adult relationship, in almost the exact words of Judge Reinhardt in his Ninth Circuit decision striking down Proposition 8. It's your number one relationship, your number one person, in the words of one of our prominent critics, John Corvino. And the reason that that must be wrong is that it can make no sense at all of any of the other features that make marriage different, and that, at least among rank and file supporters of same-sex marriage, are still uncontroversial. So, for example, if marriage is just an emotional union, if that's what makes it different from other forms of friendship, then there's no reason of principle that it should be limited to two people. 3 or more people can have an emotional union, and whatever benefits are supposed to derive simply from that. And this isn't just a kind of conservative scaremongering point, it's a point that's been profiled in very sympathetic ways in venues like New York Magazine, where you have a throuple, which is a 3-person couple, being portrayed very sympathetically as 3 men in their case who love each other, who have a deep emotional bond. If one dies, the other 2 want to be heirs. If one is sick, the other 2 want to visit in the hospital. They want their tax filings privileged. They don't want children that they might raise to be stigmatized, and so on. If the revisionist view, what we are calling the revisionist view, the view that would redefine marriage to include same-sex couples, is right, there is no answer to that objection. Second, the idea that marriage, whatever else it involves, requires a kind of pledge of permanence to get off the ground at all. Incomprehensible on the revisionist view. If what makes marriage different is a certain sort of emotional union, then as soon as that is gone, the relationship has gone back to being a friendship. There's simply no marriage there to preserve. And we can already see that this is the vision that was incipient in proposals for no-fault divorce, which swept the country in the 1980s. The idea that marriage is until love lasts, until a certain sort of emotional union lasts. So it can't be a union of 2 and only 2. It can't be a union involving permanent commitment if the revisionist view is right. It can't even be a sexual union. Most of us agree that that's part of what makes marriage different, but if it's just emotional intensity or priority, then depending on your temperament or taste, that might be served in better ways, or more consistently or more constantly, by other kinds of intimate activity. Deep conversation, cooperation amid difficulty or tragedy, or whatever else. And there's certainly no connection, therefore, to sexual exclusivity with marriage. Sometimes that might help the emotional union of the partnership, sometimes it might hurt it. And again, this isn't just a conservative claim, it's not a red herring. Dan Savage, a very prominent same-sex marriage activist, in a very long profile in New York Times Magazine, says that one of the benefits of recognizing same-sex unions as marriages is that precisely that it would introduce what he calls flexibility into opposite-sex relationships, that it would encourage everyone to see marriage as mainly about the emotional fulfillment of the partners in it, which might be helped, but he thinks in many cases will actually be served by having some agreed-upon sexual outlets. And the same is true of any connection to family life. That might hurt or it might help emotional union. And if that's right, then there's no systematic sense in which marriage is inherently extended or fulfilled by the bearing and rearing of children, or therefore, as a general rule, shaped by the demands of family life. In other words, everything that sets marriage apart from companionship, which is an obviously broader category, is eliminated as a general rule if marriage is just what the revisionist view thinks it is. That's why this is about redefining the civil institution of marriage. It's not about expanding the pool of people eligible to get this one thing called marriage. It's about replacing one concept of marriage with another, one that would make no sense of any of the other norms of marriage, or, by the way, of any interest that the state would have in recognizing this. After all, in general, the more personal and intimate a relationship is, the less the state's involved. It's involved much more in business partnerships than it is in best friendships. There's a connection between the public good and marriage because there's a connection between children and marriage. But that's something that, again, the revisionist view simply cannot explain. And again, this is a point that increasingly the leadership of the proponents for same-sex marriage are coming to agree with us on. You have, for example, a document called Beyond Same-Sex Marriage, in which 300 activists and academics and scholars, LGBT and allied, as they self-identify, who say, yes, complementarity is optional, yes, requiring it is arbitrary and discriminatory and unjust, and by the same token, the same goes for monogamy and sexual exclusivity, and even the requirement of a sexual relationship at all. And they propose, as a matter of basic justice, extending legal recognition to basically any form of consensual relationship that you can describe in polite English. So they and we agree that complementarity and everything else that makes marriage different will rise or fall together, and we only disagree on whether it's a good thing or a very bad thing to make the whole thing unravel. And Ryan Anderson will discuss a bit of why the state's involved and why it is a bad thing to make them unravel. But before we get to that, just a brief overview of the competing alternative. What we call the conjugal view of marriage, what the Judeo-Christian tradition captures by the concept of one flesh union, but what, in truth, every major religious tradition, as well as many secular, philosophical, and legal traditions, have latched onto more or less. It shows up in the canon law, but also in the civil law, in the common law that we inherited from England. It shows up in Augustine and Aquinas, but it also shows up in Aristotle and Plato and Socrates and Xenophanes and Musonius Rufus and Plutarch, Kant, and many others. And we ourselves capture it by the concept of a comprehensive union. So the point is that a voluntary community, communion with others of any kind, is made by a certain unifying activity, pursuing certain goods that unify you under certain commitments to each other. And that in each of those three senses, the dimensions of the partners united, the goods around which they are united, and the commitment that those first two things call for, marriage is set apart by being comprehensive. Take the first one. Most friendships are unions of hearts and minds. You come to know and seek the other person's good. They're kind of realized in conversations and common pursuits. But marriage is a union of heart, mind, and body, because again, it comprehensively unites the partners, and the body is a real part of the person, and not just an instrument or vehicle or property. And what is bodily union? What is one flesh union, to use the religious term, but by no means the exclusively religious concept? Well, we can take the analogy from the union of parts in a single person. My own organs, my heart, my lungs, are one body because they're actively coordinated together towards a single bodily end of the whole that they compose together, which is my biological life. And the remarkable fact is that that kind of unity, unity as of one body, is possible between two people, but only in one respect. That's with respect to reproduction, with respect to the bodily act of making new life. In intercourse between a man and a woman, in the marital act, the man and woman themselves are actively coordinated towards a single bodily end of the whole that they compose together, which is their reproduction, the reproduction of the couple. The second sense of comprehensive, it's around the activities that unite the partners. So you can have all kinds of voluntary communities that might be ordered around sports or around aesthetic experience and skillful performance, a drama troupe and so on. But marriage is comprehensive in that sense too. It's ordered around not just this or that human value, but whole new human beings, new loci of all of these values. And how is that possible? Well, the very act that makes marital love also makes new life. The act that creates the comprehensive union of mind and body is also the act that's naturally ordered to, it's fulfilled by the conception of a child. And so marriage itself, the relationship that that act seals, is inherently ordered to, fulfilled, deepened, extended by the bearing and rearing of children, family life. And again, in virtue of those first two things, union as one flesh, and in the one flesh of a child that union usually brings forth, a man and a woman are called to comprehensive commitment. If you're really united as the parts of a single organic whole, then like the parts of a single organic whole, your union should be total and lasting for the life of the parts. Comprehensive union calls for comprehensive commitment. That's permanent through time and comprehensive at each time, which means exclusivity. So this vision of marriage makes sense of all of the norms that make marriage different from other relationships, that make marriage something that the state has an interest in despite its usual distance from the most intimate parts of our lives, and that can support the common good in practice as well as in principle. And the revisionist view, increasingly according to its own proponents, cannot do any of that. So the proposal to recognize same-sex marriage is an invitation to finally and formally replace one view with the other. And now Ryan will talk about some of the harms to the common good, to real flesh and blood human beings, of replacing one ideal with the other.